How a romance novel saved the galaxy by Ariana Deralte. Chapter 43. Maze 6. There was a sense of anticipation in the force. There was a shatter point that was about to go off, and it was all centered on the council and perhaps on the being standing in the heart of the chamber. Madame Nu stood before them, the picture of dignity in her archivist robes. Her face was set in a grimace that did little to quell Maze's worries about a report on the no-attachment rule and the age limit rule. In the 10 years before and during the Russian Reformation, for which we have adequate records, over 100 Jedi turned to the dark side. There has not been such a large number of Jedi turned to the dark side over such a short period ever since. Mace thought he detected relief from some of his fellow consulators. However, the Jedi Order of the time was nearly 3 times larger than it is today. When adjusted for population, the rate of Jedi turning to the dark side remains steady at 1.5 of the overall population, with a standard deviation of 1.2. The rate fluctuates, but statistically speaking, there was no change before and after the Russian Reformation, though the rate is overall higher in the first 75 years after the Reformation. I hypothesize this is actually due to Jedi suffering from the fallout of the Jedi-Sith War, but more research is needed.
I don't understand, Adigalia humbly admitted. Does this support the no-attachment rule or disprove it?
Neither, unfortunately. There simply hasn't been a sustained period of war since the Russian Reformation. As a result, the low and fairly stable rate of Jedi turning since then may be attributable to the no-attachment rule, but it may also be the natural result of Jedi no longer fighting in massive wars. It is interesting to note that there is one spike in falls to the dark side which correlates with a period of warfare and its aftermath, but there are not enough data points to make it statistically significant, namely the Mandalorian Excision, which happened a few hundred years later. For those who are not familiar with it, she began.
Mace was fairly sure most of them were familiar, but no one was going to interrupt New in lecture mode.
The Republican Senate authorized a task force made up of the judicial forces and security forces from various sectors to wipe out the Mandalorians. The Jedi Council of the time protested, as we would any wholesale slaughter of a people, and were excluded from the Republic's forces when they moved against the Mandalorian sector. Rather than risk engaging with the Mandalorians in battle whenever possible, the Republic's forces dropped multiple types of bombs, which made the surface of many of the Mandalorians' planets a barren wasteland. In the aftermath, the rate of Jedi falling to the dark side rises to 4%, and a cursory examination of the archives does show that those who did were often part of the Jedi sent to help the Mandalorians after the Excision.
I'm surprised the Mandalorians didn't kill them, said Stacey.
Jocasta raised an eyebrow. Dire circumstances create strange allies. I'm sure some were killed, but now that we understand the culture a bit better, I suspect quite a few Jedi also joined the Mandalorians. The rate of Jedi leaving the Order while working the Mandalorian sector after the Excision was also quite high. We are well aware of how easy it is to be adopted into Mandalorian culture at this point.
Her tone was a touch sarcastic.
I will leave it to the council to further debate this issue after reading my full report.
And the steely stare she sent around the room made it clear she expected them to read it in
detail before even touching the topic. However, this report has brought to my attention an issue which needs to be addressed.
Surely we can deal with this other issue at another time, said Ki-Adi-Mundi. Mace appreciated his futile effort to end the already long meeting. They had taken a break for the midday meal, but had otherwise been in the council chamber since early this morning.
I imagine, said Jocasta dryly, that is how this issue has gone unaddressed. To put it bluntly,
Mace had a side full of smiles, and she did little else.
The Jedi are dying out. We have masters and knights dying on missions or going missing at rates which are not being replaced by new knights and masters. This is an issue which should have been dealt with since the time it became clear there were not enough available masters and knights to take on all our initiates. I have searched the council records for 50 years ago, and the decision to send off initiates to the Corps at 13 is also because their numbers are falling. Nor has that measure helped either the Corps or our numbers rise.
They were Jedi, so there were no outbursts of disbelief or cries of dismay, but the Force carried a heavy hint of sorrow and even fear.
There is more, said Jocasta grimly. I recruited Master Tal to compare the incoming Senate recommendations with the resulting missions, especially those resulting in Jedi casualties. She started with Galadran and is working her way backwards. So far, she's only 20 years back, but the results are striking. Key information is being left out of the Senate reports, which often results in us not sending the proper deans. A lone master instead of a master and a few knights. Some of that is related to our fallen numbers, but if we knew the situation was worse, we would at least consider sending more people. Galadran is in fact peculiar in the sense that the Senate suggested we send many more Jedi than were actually needed. In every other case, they recommended we send too few, and it often results in death for the lone Jedi facing overwhelming odds. Some examples. Master Timur died holding back a volcano so people could escape. The Senate report omits any mention of seismic activity, and they requested a single Jedi to mediate disputes between villages. Timur's report before her death says that she arrived to discover that the disputes were about the increase in seismic activity and were mentioned in their request to the Senate. Knight Killen died so that other slaves could escape. The Senate request asked for a single knight to investigate missing person cases on Sinam. Knight Villain arrived to discover that the planet's president had requested several Jedi to help eradicate the slavery gangs she knew existed in their ancient ruins. Knight Rillian requested backup, but before it could arrive, he disappeared into Sinam's underworld. His backup found him as a slave himself, helping free slaves, but he held back escaping so others could be free. These are some of the most obvious examples, but there are others which fit the pattern, and this is only in the past 20 years. The Force tells me that Tal will find many more, finished Jocasta grimly.
Almost as one, the council reached out to the Force for reassurance or confirmation. The Force embraced them and ensured them that Jocasta's results were correct, distressing as the thought was.
"We can't trust the Senate,"
said Mace flatly after several minutes, then closed his eyes against a wave of pain from a shadow point so large it extended past the edges of his vision.
"The Force agrees with me."
"Why would they deliberately limit the number of Jedi being sent on missions?"
asked Piel.
Not me,
said Yaddle. Many others nodded in agreement. Although the Order strived to be independent in terms of food and clothing and upkeep, they were also a burden on the Republic's budget, no matter how negligible a burden they were compared to, say, having a standing army across the Republic.
I agree that money is part of the Senate's motivations, but there was obviously some malicious intervention in the Galadran mission, either aimed at us or the Mandalorians, said Jocasta. Set shadows to investigate, we will, said Yoda.
And in the meantime, we must extricate ourselves from being so dependent on the Senate, said Tivoka. They are sending us to die!
The Wookiee usually kept his temper tightly under control, but there was anger leaking into the Force. How? Asked Adigalia. They're going to accuse us of wanting to be independent in order to form an army again and seize power. We know that is ridiculous, but they don't. They were all silent as they considered their options. We sound small, said Teresinubi. Just as they have slowly been whittling down the Order, we will slowly withdraw from them, eh?
We have outreach temples which are unoccupied and underutilized, suggested Addy. Some are quite large. We can detach groups of Jedi from the main temple and get them out of the way of being assigned to missions by the Senate. We can't refuse missions, but we can tell them that we don't have the personnel to handle them.
Interesting idea that is, said Yaddle.
I would like to say we have the money to go independent,
said Polly Dapachin. The man was retiring from the council soon for health reasons, but he was the designated counselor dealing with the Order's funds.
But it's rather complicated. We do have a large remainder fund, since most years the Order operates under budget. However, those funds are held by the Senate and would either need the authorization of the Chancellor or the Council to distribute. We would essentially be viewed as robbing the Republic of funds, even though that fund has not been tapped for several centuries and, by law, can only be used by the Jedi Order.
And what are the gifts we get given as thanks for our work? Asked Ki Adi.
Those that are in credit form go either to our outreach clinics here on Coruscant or to the core, explained Polly. Edu and Medi are always in need of more resources to provide more services to the galaxy. However, we do have a large amount of non-monetary gifts gathered in dust and storage.
Mace couldn't really tell that the man was smiling behind his respirator, but he was radiating some satisfaction. We'd have to liquidate them discreetly so as not to embarrass those who gifted them, mused Kiadi. The Shadows could do that, suggested Terra. I also suggest that our withdrawal from the Senate will go smoother if we can improve our image in the public eye and hence their senators' eyes.
I realize we have long maintained that actions should speak louder than words, but the word Jedi is far too entwined with babysitter. Perhaps we should hire Mora Damo to write some Jedi novels to improve our image?
Mace glared at him, and several other counselors frowned in his direction. The concierge seemed immune.
Our image is not something Jedi should be worrying about, said Opoo.
I disagree, said Addie.
Your point is taken, Terra, interjected Stacey. But can't we do that without the romance part?
Exasperation was losing his voice. The elderly Iktochi master had no patience for romance novels and had made that repeatedly clear in council.
Can we?
Mused Terra.
Stacey opened his mouth to respond with a long and familiar discourse on how the romance novel tarnished the Jedi image. Meanwhile, Addie and Obo were obviously having an argument using the Force to communicate. Mace sat and settled back into his chair. They'd almost had some productive conversation there for 5 whole minutes. Still, despite the pain that was pulsing around his head, the Force felt lighter. It had been unthinkable before Madame Nu's report, but withdrawing, however slowly, from the Senate was the right path.